But whose fault is this, he continues? Does not the fault lie first with philosophy, which has allowed itself to be convinced by the concept of error, even though this concept is itself borrowed from facts, relatively insignificant and arbitrary facts? The worst literature produces sottises, while the best, Flaubert, Baudelaire, Blois, was haunted by the problem of stupidity. By giving this problem all its cosmic, encyclopedic, and noseological dimensions, such literature was able to carry it as far as the entrance to philosophy itself. As far as the entrance to philosophy itself. So the best literature, on the one hand you have bad literature and philosophy, and on the other hand, the best literature which introduces to philosophy, which is on the threshold of what philosophy should be. Yeah? Now, on the other hand, to say that stupidity is never stupidity of the other doesn't mean only that it is always reserved for my fellow creatures, mes semblables, as human beings. It means also that I as a philosopher, or a theoretician, or not, always risk being compelled to attribute stupidity to myself, the I to which I refer, or the stupidity that I think automatically in a stupid manner, bêtement, that I identify in others. Here, to follow this, to interpret Deleuze's intention, we could follow Flaubert's tracks, and of course, Deleuze refers to it also. But let me get to my conclusion. I'm not saying this in order to discredit discourses that do whatever they can to specify as much as possible the humanity, the properly human character of bestiality. D'accord. Bestialité is something human. Ou bêtise, Deleuze. Bêtise is human. I'm not saying this in order to confuse humans with animals, of course. To say that there is no difference between human animals and non-human animals. On the contrary, it's in order to refine the differential concepts that I underline a certain non-pertinence of the concept and of the logic that are put to work here, in order to reserve the privilege of what one thinks one can define as human bestiality and human bêtise, stupidity. That is, to reserve these to the properly human animality, supposed to be free and responsible and not reactive, able to discern between good and evil, able to do evil for the sake of evil, and so on. I would like to conclude by specifying my reading of the original form that this tradition takes in Deleuze, because Deleuze is still traditional from that point of view, whatever his originality might be from another point of view. I think that Deleuze both belongs to this tradition and on the background of this tradition remains original, or original if you want. When in the Schellingian vein that I recall, Deleuze says, la bêtise n'est pas l'animalité, stupidity is not animality, or the animals are in a sense forewarned against this background by their explicit forms. He implies that man, even where his form, the determination of his individuation, protects itself against the ground as ground, the Urgrund as Ungrund, man remains nevertheless as an undetermined freedom in relation with this groundless ground. And that's where, according to him, this properly human possibility, stability, comes from. But what permits saying this in this form? Let's re-examine the statement. Les animaux sont en quelque sorte prémunis contre ce fond par leurs formes explicites. I underline en quelque sorte prémunis et formes explicites. If they are prémunis, forewarned, it means that they are in relation, they have some relation with this ground. And they are under the threat of this ground. Of course, what is often tempted to see, with respect to many animals, a relation to the groundless ground, of course. A relation more fascinating and fascinated, anxious and abyssal as with man. Even in what would forward or protect them, we can feel a proximity, an obsessing, threatening proximity of this ground against which, but like humans, against which animals like humans would protect themselves. Moreover, when Deleuze, in such a sharp fashion, wants to separate man from animals, as to bêtise, by saying in a determined and decided fashion, la bêtise n'est pas l'animalité, why does he introduce phrases that are so resistant to sharp opposition, such as en quelque sorte, in a sense, or forewarned, prémuni? Prémuni, what does it mean, prémuni? Protected in some sense, but to what extent, what sense? En quelque sorte. A notion prémuni or forewarned, en quelque sorte, that notion that implies a degree. And again, the problem of immunity, which I take very seriously in other texts of autoimmunity. There is always a degree of more or less protection against something to which one remains related, or a more or less of protection. The way some animals sense the coming of an earthquake that remains imperceptible to man. Above all, what could we do with a phrase like forms explicites? What does that mean, form explicit? What about implicit forms? So this question of the implicit, of the difference implicit, explicit, not only opens on gradations, a differentiality without opposition, with no opposition, a gradation of more or less, but also opens on the question of the unconscious. That's why I started with psychoanalysis.